Can the U.S. Federal Reserve remain independent in a world where political pressure, tariffs, and tweets reshape markets overnight? Can the global economy bear the cost of mass rearmament without compromising social stability? And how much damage can Donald Trump's economic unpredictability do before the world loses its financial bearings? In this episode, we examine two converging global dilemmas: the political assault on the central banking in Trump's second term and the costly rush to military rearmament among NATO nations and beyond. Both trends signal a profound recalibration of economic orthodoxy and international cooperation. And I'm Salma Al-Fiqi, and this is In Focus. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is once again in the political crosshairs. Trump's renewed attacks and talk of prematurely replacing Powell are unsettling, and markets casting a long shadow over monetary policy. The Fed finds itself cornered by competing pressures. Trump wants interest rate cuts, yet his tariff policies and fiscal expansion drive inflation risk. Meanwhile, speculation around a shadow Fed chair has raised alarms about institutional independence and credibility. The Fed's June decision to hold rates steady may seem prudent amid uncertainty. Wider war on economic orthodoxy. And joining us to unpack these developments as Mr. Peter Tanos, chairman of the Links Investment Advisory and a veteran expert in the U.S. economic and financial strategy. Welcome, Mr. Tanos, and thank you so much for joining me today at In Focus.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Salma.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let me start off and ask you, how would you characterize Trump's renewed attacks on the chair, Jerome Powell? Are they just politics or something more destabilizing, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's more than politics, and in fact, it's disturbingly unstable. The notion that the President of the United States is calling the Fed chairman by some pretty nasty names is unsettling. One of the key tenets of American finance and the American economy is the independence of the Federal Reserve. And Jay Powell is doing a very good job in maintaining that independence despite being called names by the most powerful man on earth. So it is troubling.
Okay, well, we're hearing reports that Trump may announce Powell's successor as early as September. What do you think are the potential market implications of this move might be?
The market will probably not react very badly because his shadow chairman of the Federal Reserve, if he appoints one, will have no power. The power remains with Chairman Powell and the Federal Reserve until his term ends next May. So the controversy about this, of course, is that every time the Fed makes a decision, if a shadow chairman waiting in the wings, he or she will probably have some comments that are derogatory, just like the president's, and that is clearly not going to be something that is particularly welcome in financial circles.
Well, actually, that was my next question regarding the idea of the shadow Fed chair, and that has raised a lot of alarm bells. And you were just mentioning how dangerous is this scenario in your view, do you think, as you just mentioned?
No, I don't think it's terribly dangerous because, as I mentioned, Salma, the fact is that the shadow chair is not going to have any power.
Okay.
All he'll have is
It's
the
the chair.
ability to make statements, and that is not power.
Well, if Trump genuinely wants rate cuts, why do you think this tariff and fiscal policies are pushing in the opposite direction?
Okay, here's the argument on both sides. Okay, Trump is making the case that there is no inflation in the economy, that the economy is fine. It has not been afflicted by the tariffs, and therefore, in order to help the economy, particularly with the high cost of our national debt, the Fed should lower interest rates for everybody's benefit. That's the Trump argument.
Mhm.
The Fed's argument
Yeah.
is that we don't know yet what the inflationary effects are going to be from the tariffs. And the Fed is taking the attitude of we're going to wait and see before we lower the interest rates whether or not the tariffs result in higher inflation, which also makes sense. But that is essentially the crux of the argument on both
Mhm.
sides.
Well, looking at the Fed's recent decision to hold the rates steady, do you believe that that was the right call?
Absolutely, and so does the rest of the financial community.
Mhm.
It was the right call for precisely the reason that the Federal Reserve Chairman mentioned. That let's wait and see. The worst thing, understand that the worst thing that could happen is for the Fed to lower interest rates now, and then all of a sudden inflation resurfaces and they have to raise them again. That would be very destabilizing, and that is precisely what the Fed is trying to avoid.
Mhm. Well, Trump's tariffs are creating uncertainty, of course, about the future inflation. How do you expect this to affect the consumer prices in the coming quarters, Mr. Tanos?
Well, part of the problem is that Trump is using the tariffs more as a negotiating tactic than anything else. So we don't really have the answer to this yet. If some of the tariffs he's imposed stay on, they will undoubtedly have an inflationary effect, but they may not all stay because Trump has been a very successful negotiator on these economic issues. So it's possible that most of these tariffs will not endure. The one tariff that will endure is a 10% tariff on just about everything that comes into the United States.
Mhm.
And he needs that to raise revenue to pay for the increased deficits we're going to incur as a result of his big, beautiful tax bill.
Mm. Well, what's the risk of the Fed's misreading inflation data due to the delays in the tariff pass through and the misaligned political messaging, do you think?
Well, see, that's the whole point. The point is there's not a big risk here because if they do nothing and wait and act when the data is available, then they will have done the right thing. Remember, the two most important words to the Fed are data dependent. Those words keep coming up all the time because, as Chairman Powell keeps saying, we make decisions based on the economic data that confronts us. So they're going to wait and see what the data shows. If the data shows that inflation is under control, and particularly if the employment rate goes up a bit, then they will definitely reduce rates. Best guess so far is that there will be two rate cuts later this year.
Okay, so the Fed is now facing pressure from both ends. We have the political interference and the market volatility. Do you think, in that case, Mr. Tanos, can the institution maintain its independence?
Yeah, oh, it has to stay independent. It's a bedrock of the American financial system. Uh, the if you want to start worrying about something, start worrying what will happen when mid next year a new chairman of the Federal Reserve is appointed who basically holds allegiance to President Trump. The one saving grace about all this is that, remember, the Fed chair is the chair, but he's only one vote on the Federal Open Markets Committee. There are a number of other voters there, and they hopefully will stay independent.
So you do believe that we're approaching a credibility crisis maybe later for the Federal Reserve?
No, not for the Federal Reserve. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Yes, later on, there will be a credibility crisis depending on who President Trump appoints as
Points.
chairman of the Fed. But as I pointed out, the chair of the Federal Reserve, does not make decisions independently. He leads a team and they vote on the Fed's actions, whether to increase, leave the rates the same, or decrease rates. So the Fed chair is the chair, but he's not the sole decider.
With the Vice Chair Bowman and Governor Waller calling for cuts, is there a risk, do you think, of internal division within the Fed?
Sure, of course there is, because they all don't vote in unison. Some have different views, like everything else, just like the Supreme Court, where there is a lot of internal divisions. The ultimate decision is a majority vote, and that is what we will see. But to answer your question, sure, there's division. There's division now, and there probably always will be. That's why one person doesn't make the decisions.
And do you think markets actually should begin pricing in a more Trump-aligned Fed now, or is it still too premature?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Selma. It probably is premature. As you know, the markets have been extraordinary. The stock market just set a new high despite all of this turmoil. So there's a lot of confidence that Trump is steering the economy correctly. It would be nicer if he didn't call the Fed chair by nasty names, which is somewhat unpresidential. But this is the way it is, and as far as the market is concerned, the market is behind him.
Well, finally, Mr. Tanos, what would your advice be to the Fed leadership in navigating this politicized and uncertain environment, do you think? What would you tell them?
I think Chairman Powell has done a superb job. I mean, he has been a rock of Gibraltar in maintaining the Fed's independence. I can only pray and hope that the next Fed chair will follow his example.
Well, Mr. Peter Tanos, thank you so much, and please do stay with us for our next segment on global rearmament and defense economics. Well, from interest rate turmoil in Washington to strategic spending across the NATO capitals, it's clear the global economic order is entering uncharted territory, whether through central bank destabilization or defense-driven deficits. The costs of power projection are mounting. And from Washington to Warsaw, the world's leading economies are pouring billions into defense. And NATO has now committed to raising military spending to a 3.5% of the GDP by 2035 and an $800 billion annual surge. The logic is security, but the cost? Stretched public finances, distorted industrial priorities, and a dangerous overlap between the defense policy and domestic economic agendas. While military research and development may spark innovation and the promise of job creation and economic renewal through arms, spending is largely a political myth. Governments now face the hard choice between honest rearmament or economic delusion. And still with us is Mr. Peter Tanos. Welcome again, Mr. Tanos. And as we shift gears from the U.S. domestic front to the global arena, where national security spending is undergoing an extraordinary transformation. Let me ask you first, NATO's 3.5% of the GDP defense target is ambitious. Is this level of spending economically viable across the alliance, do you think, sir?
I guess, Selma, the simple answer is no. The 3.5%, as you correctly pointed out, will result in an $800 billion excess spending in the EU. And that is going to be very hard for them to do because there are many of these countries are already in a deficit position. This means that they're going to have to cut essential services in other areas or widen the deficits. So it is troubling.
And The Economist warns of a strain on public finances. What do you think will be the first casualty of these higher defense budgets, social services, infrastructure, or debt sustainability, do you think?
Yeah, the you have to go at where the expenses are the largest, and social services in all of these countries are the largest expense that they have. So clearly, that if there are any cuts, they'll have to come from that arena, and you can imagine how poorly that's going to be received. I guess we can thank Russia's invasion of Ukraine for prompting this emphasis now on increasing spending on defense. Just yet another thing to blame Mr. Putin for.
Um, do you think our governments are being transparent enough with voters about the true economic cost of this rearmament?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely good point. I mean, the voters are not going to be happy at all if they find out that they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars more on defense and having to cut social services or other needed issues, needed expenses to pay for it. That's not going to go over well. I know that some of the leaders of the EU have mentioned that, well, this defense spending is going to create a lot more jobs. Um, that isn't obvious, and the economic repercussions and the social repercussions are probably going to be major and will probably result in some uh, election surprises.
Well, actually, my next question does have the same idea that you were just speaking about, that there's a political push to frame defense spending as a jobs and innovation driver. And from your opinion, is this credible?
Yeah, there is a little bit of truth to that, but I mean, when you look at the wars, particularly the war in the Russia-Ukraine war, and you see how warfare has changed. I mean, uh, they're killing each other not with rifles and tanks as much as they are with drones that are pretty cheap and easy to produce. I mean, the drones fly over and kill a lot of people remotely. Rockets, missiles do the same thing. So technologically, they're going to be working on defense and war issues that are quite different from the ones we've been used to in the past.
Um, Regarding the military R&D can create tax fillers, but is this enough, do you think, to justify the massive outlays we're seeing?
No, I don't. The political leaders will probably find that out soon enough.
Um, do you think you can actually walk us through the potential inflationary impacts of a simultaneous rearmament push across Europe and the US?
Sure. Uh, it, it will be similar to potential inflationary pressures here in the United States. The biggest problem we have here in the United States, and Europe may well be going down that path, is the cost of our deficit. For example, in the United States today, the cost of the deficit, just the interest cost of our debt, is $1 trillion a year. That works out to about $2.7 billion a day just in interest cost. This is something that will create a financial crisis in this country in the not too distant future. I wish I could say when. I can't. I've been talking about this for a long time. It hasn't happened yet, but it is almost inevitable. As Europe increases its defense spending by hundreds of billions of dollars, they will be facing the same deficit issues and the same possible inflationary issues as they borrow money, as they try to borrow more and more money to close the deficits.
Well, how might the interest rates respond to rising defense spending and ballooning deficits in developed economies, do you think, sir?
Yeah, well, this is precisely what the Federal Reserve is trying to grope with. Will the increased deficits cause higher interest rates? I think they will, and I can tell you how I think it'll happen. Looking at the United States, which I know better, for example, um, we foreigners buy a great amount of U.S. debt. China and Japan are the two largest holders of American debt. They will probably continue to buy American debt, but they may well take the position that given our tremendously mounting deficits, they want us to have higher interest rates to get them to buy our debt. Those higher interest rates are going to be extraordinarily costly to the United States and could possibly create a financial crisis. Europe may well be going down the same path.
Politicians are selling defense as a post-industrial job solution. Is this narrative economically sound, in your
It's
opinion?
questionable. Salma, we don't really know the answer to that, but it's questionable with increased productivity, with the changing nature of defense spending. We don't really know how much employment it's going to create. We do know that it'll probably create a much larger deficit.
Well, okay, let me move on to another point. The Economist notes the risk of duplication, 12 tank models across the EU, for instance, and how much of this is inefficiency and how much of this is political inertia, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's both. It's both inefficient and it is inertia. For example, I think The Economist also pointed this out that each country has its own version of a tank. So instead of having one tank model for the entire European nation, they have 10 or 12 different models. Well, that is hardly efficient. In the United States, we have one, and it works just fine. But then you may also start to ask the question of, are tanks really the warfare advantage that they used to be? And they probably aren't. The idea of tanks rolling across a field and shooting at enemies has been pretty much replaced with drones doing the
Yes.
same thing at a cheaper
Yeah.
cost.
And do you think with the role of automation and AI playing in defense spending, do you think we'll be seeing fewer jobs than promised in the future?
Yeah, it will have some efficiency, but remember that AI creates a whole slew of other kinds of jobs. So we don't yet know whether AI is going to reduce all jobs. We know it will reduce some jobs because AI is proven to be pretty effective at doing some things that humans do now. But also it may well also create different kinds of jobs to keep people employed and probably better ones too.
Well, Mr. Peter Tanos, thank you so much for staying with us and for sharing such incisive analysis on both America's monetary crossroads and the fiscal realities of global rearmament. Thank you so much, sir, for being with me today, and your perspective helps illuminate hard trade-offs behind the headlines. Well, from Trump's pressure on the Fed to the global surge in defense spending, it's clear the world economy is entering a period of uncertainty and recalibration. And that's all for this episode of In Focus. Until next time, stay informed and stay focused.